Mitchell has his head up, takes the feet. Oh, my! Donovan!
Get that weak stuff out of here!
Welcome back to the Junkyard Pod. I'm Tony Pesta, alongside Corey Walsh, and today Jackson finally had enough of us. He's done. He decided to leave the pod. No, I'm just kidding. Years of hard work for Jackson paid off. He was at the game tonight as a credentialed media member. He's going to be probably harassing JB right now about the lack of Sam Merrill minutes. So while Jackson is asking the questions that need to be asked, me and Corey are going to go over the last two preseason games. They're 0-2, which for some people is maybe a disaster, but they were both very good competitive games. And I think for me, like, this is one of the most interesting preseasons. Same thing with like the summer league, where it's like, I actually care about the back end guys on this roster, like Emoni Bates, Craig Porter, Isaiah Mobley. Like, I'm actually really interested to see them play, almost to the point where I'm like, okay, Donovan Mitchell, Garland, like, just go sit down, rest. Like, I want to see these guys play, because that's what I really care about. That's where, you know, preseason means something for them. So that's been very exciting to see. But I want to start off with probably most people's biggest takeaway is just the way this offense looks now that there's more spacing on the floor. The pace, the space, they've been shooting the ball way more than they have compared to last season. It seems like they're running around the floor more than they did the year before. So, Corey, what have your thoughts been on the new brand of basketball we're seeing from the Cavs?
I think the word to describe it is probably volume, because there were points even in the second game where if you were just tracking the shot attempts and where they were, there was a point where the Cavs were kind of hovering around 50% of their shots were past the arc, which I think Cavs fans would have killed for that number to be even 40 last year. And we are seeing massive volume from confident shooters. It doesn't feel like they are feeling forced to take them due to just someone has to take them. They're open, they're available, they're in the flow of the offense. It just naturally, everything A is more aesthetically pleasing, but B, also the offense can develop a lot more wrinkles to it now versus defenders kind of knowing on the opposing teams, all right, if we lock in on Garland and Mitchell, pretty much we will let everyone else take any kind of shots that they want from anywhere on the floor. And we're seeing whether it's Max Strus, Niang, Jerome. In game one, Merrill had a sense of this, but like you said, Jackson spoke too soon, and he is no longer with us, Sam Merrill, and Jackson by proxy. But overall, the offense definitely is staggering. And JB came out today saying it was a point of emphasis. And I don't know if this was just to say it, but saying that he wants 60 field goal attempts to be from beyond the arc. I mean,
he said they were a little gun shy in that first game. They took 48.
Yeah, I don't know if that's JB just really being proud that people are going to look at him and be like, maybe, you know, he can evolve offensively. And JB just took the dial of evolving and just maxed it out. It's like, I am going to just shatter everyone's brains with the amount. We're going to be the Houston Rockets under Mike D'Antoni. And if that's what this team turns into, that's great, because the amount of movement I see off ball alone validates saying that this offense has evolved. And with the volume of 3-point shots that come from it, I mean, I think I could speak for both of us saying this just makes us both very excited as to where the Cavs offense can go, especially if the bodies coming off the bench can remain healthy, because they also help continue and unlock this offense going forward.
Yeah, 100%. I think what we all wanted to see entering the season was exactly what we have seen in the preseason from the offense, which is just they're moving with pace. They're not walking the ball up the floor as much. And everyone on the team has a willingness to just fire away from deep. You mentioned, I think over like close to 50% of their shots in the first game came from the 3-point line. I think more than 50% of their shots came from the 3-point line in this game. They took 44 and 84 total field goals. So yeah, over 50% of their shots were from behind the line. That's just like unheard of. If you would have told me this last year, the Cavs would be doing that, it's like, there's no way. I think they took about 31 threes last season per game, which was 24th in the league, if I recall. And like, it just makes such a difference for the offense. You mentioned even like for Donovan Mitchell, there were so many times in this game, even though he didn't necessarily play that well, where he's catching it and he has an advantage because his defender is scrambling to get back to him because Max Strus just came off a screen on the other side of the floor, or Ty Jerome got into the paint and now they're trying to spread out to cover George Niang or Dean Wade or whoever else is out there. And just having all this off-ball movement is allowing Mitchell and Garland, who had a very good game in the first quarter especially, it's giving them more room to operate. And that's really what you needed. Is it was less about, like, when we talk about how much of a difference Max Strus can make, it was never like, oh, Max Strus is going to come in and be an all-star. It was just, he's going to bring a stylistic change to this team that's going to allow everyone else to thrive. And that's kind of what we've seen so far. And if JB is not yanking our chain here, hopefully it's the type of offense we're going to see throughout the year.
Yeah, I get why the offense was the way it was last year. I think it makes sense as a coach. You have to build around the personnel you have. And I don't think anyone was describing last year's Cavaliers as a bunch of flamethrowers that were being held back by the offensive scheme they were in. You had two players and Cedi Osman who were willing to shoot threes at the volume that the team needed. But if you're only relying on that many people, it makes sense why the Cavs were 24th. So you can only get angry to an extent, because if the Cavs went with this offense last year, yes, the offense would be more modernized and would probably open up a little more, but I don't think the team would convert on the looks that we're seeing from at least 2 games of preseason this year. The team's emphasis was clearly perimeter shooting and depth off the bench to help support whoever is on the floor. And now the offense can evolve and it makes sense with who's there. So it's like a perfect cohesion of the two ideas.
Yeah, and that was the problem with Cedi last year, was that he was like the only role player who was willing to shoot from deep, but he's a very erratic shooter. Like when he was rolling, there's a reason Cedi was at the core of like every Cavalanche, is because when all of a sudden you have that extra shooter on the floor next to these really talented 4 guys, like it's a Cavalanche. Everything just clicks for them. But then on the nights where he doesn't have it and he's 0 for 4 or whatever, like it was difficult to play him consistently in the rotation. And now the Cavs have like 4 guys who can play that Cedi role of just like, hey, come in the game. If you're open at all, shoot it. I feel like with everyone shooting at will, it just breeds more confidence across the roster. Like I think Dean Wade is a really good example of that, where last year it was a lot of like, okay, we're going to stand around, watch Mitchell and Garland dribble the ball, and once every 10 minutes, I'm going to shoot a 3-pointer. Now it's like the Cavs are shooting a 3-pointer every other possession. And so for someone like Dean Wade, it feels like that shot's coming within the flow of the offense. He's not thinking about it as much. And I think just removing that hesitation from everyone from top to bottom, it's going to make a huge difference for the Cavs.
I think it's going to be very interesting when they can run the 2 big sets that we're accustomed to with Mobley and Allen. There really isn't any sort of, like, you can throw Damian Jones out there with Evan Mobley at the same time, but it still doesn't kind of replicate the impact of having 2 all-star caliber bigs on the floor. And I think it's going to be interesting seeing how this type of movement and screen setting by the bigs will really help open up the offense even further. I think people might worry that I think people are now excited that we've seen like a quote unquote modern offense with Mobley at the 5 and then 4 shooters pretty much around him. I don't think it's going to be as much of a step down as I think people fear it's going to be. I think if anything, it's just going to be more quality movement amongst 3 players with 2 that also should benefit from having that much space to breathe inside the arc.
And that's a great point. And to that point, like even just having Allen out there, like that's a guy who knows how to set screens. Mobley, for all the great things we've seen from him, he's not the best screen setter in the world. So when you have all that movement and that floor spacing, and you get a guy like Jarrett Allen who can set a bone-crushing screen, you might get even more looks. And I've been impressed by Damian Jones just because I feel like he's been a pretty productive player when he's out there. But there were a couple plays where, you know, Mobley passes it to him or someone gives him the dump-off pass. And if that was Allen, that's a dunk or an easy bucket. And Jones just isn't quite that same player. But I have been pleased with the few minutes we've seen from him. I think the Cavs' depth is one of the more interesting things we have seen from the preseason. As I kind of touched on at the start, I really am interested in everyone top to bottom on this roster. And so is there any role player or someone on the back end of the rotation that you've been impressed with?
I feel like Dean Wade has to be mentioned. I know it's going to be everyone's like notable player probably coming out of this game just because he came alive. Dean, his main issue last year was just that his shot was flat out not falling for him. And I felt like he had the same looks in this game that he was having last year, and he just wasn't making them. So if he's not doing that, he plays good enough perimeter defense to warrant him being out there. But if the shot's not falling, he's a complete net negative because offensively, he's not that gifted. But I feel like you're seeing a lot more. He looks comfortable and he looks confident. And I feel like last year, his injuries kind of got him off on the wrong foot to start the year. He just never recovered. And I think a fresh offseason where, again, the floor is so spaced out for him. I mean, his looks that he had open, there was maybe a guy close to him on 2 of those attempts. Otherwise, it was pretty much like if you play 2K, your green bar is completely open. You have to pretty much misstep to not make those. But it's going to be matchup dependent. But if you're going for a strict like 10-man rotation, I think Dean would be in there over Damian Jones for me, at least.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Dean Wade, he just has a skill set that on paper it's exactly what they need on their bench. And that could be as the 10th man, or if he's clicking like we have seen at very small moments in the past, he could be higher up in the rotation because he really just does exactly what they need. Kind of fills to a degree the same role that Niang is attempting to fill, the same role that Love to a degree filled. Like just that floor stretching big. If you consider Dean Wade a big, which he kind of by nature has become a big, it's really just what you need out there to stagger Mobley and Allen. And so I think it's been encouraging to see him bounce back from a rough season. I know he was injured. He dealt with a shoulder injury for a lot of last season. He made 4 threes in this preseason game, and I just had to look up real quick. He hasn't done that since January, so it's a good sign. His confidence is definitely back on track compared to what we saw towards the end of last season where it just felt like he wasn't shooting unless he was completely wide open. And in these 2 preseason games, he has been pulling, even with defenders near him. So I think that's a really, really good sign of something that could hopefully carry over into the regular season.
It's going to be interesting because, like you said, Niang and Wade kind of fill similar roles offensively. I definitely would feel stronger about Dean Wade being out there as a 2-way player because I feel like defensively he can hold his own. I feel even though I know what George Niang can do, and I think he should be one of the first players off our bench as of right now, I think we all can see defensively he is not going to be able to keep step for step with other men when it's full speed, full strength lineups. No slight to George. He's called the minivan for a reason. And you definitely see it.
Yeah, and I still expect Niang to play significantly more minutes than Wade, but it's just nice to have someone who can fill in that position on any given night, having that versatility in your lineup while being able to play the same style of basketball, no matter who's out there. I think that's one of the biggest upgrades that we have seen is they just have so many different players who fill in and make sense next to that core 4 that depending on who's available, depending on what the matchup is, CAVS should be able to put out a lineup that's capable of competing and winning games at the highest level. So another player I want to talk about, and I'll flip it over to you. What have you seen from Isaac Okoro so far in the preseason?
I think Isaac looks also a lot more free in the offense. I think having these types of windows for him where he can take advantage of his strengths, which is really slashing to the basket and taking 3-pointers as they're available. I've always said I don't think Isaac Okoro's roadmap to being a successful player rides on him being a volume 3-point shooter. I just think it relies on him looking more comfortable in an offense. And I kind of felt similar to Jackson in the sense of last year that if you stick Okoro in the corner and just ask him to do one thing, it pretty much kind of gridlocks him and his potential. And we already saw between 2 games, we're seeing him be the secondary ball handler in sets. He has good vision. I think it's pretty underrated. I also think his handle has improved drastically this offseason. I feel like there was a sequence in this Magic game where he got the ball in transition, literally cut between 2 defenders. Yeah.
And I was like, jumped out of my seat.
I was like, this is unlike anything I've seen Isaac do recently ever. I remember writing a piece for Fear the Sword in Summer League for the second season being like, if he could develop a handle, he's going to be a really good player. And then I immediately watched the first game of that Summer League and I'm like, all right, that's not happening this year, I guess. We'll just move along. But it feels like that was probably one of his main focuses this year. And it really would benefit him a lot because I think he could do a lot of give and go action. I think he could be a good person off a pick and roll in secondary sets. I think he's really going to thrive in this second unit. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that he isn't going to be in the starting five. I think if you want Isaac Okoro to succeed, we're seeing that if he needs to share the floor with two like offensive nucleuses like Garland and Mitchell, it's going to just stick him back in the corner again. He needs to be one of the primary options on the floor. And in the current structure of the starting five, a movement shooter like Strus, who doesn't demand the ball, but will help be a connective tissue player, is something that the team needs more in that spot than what Okoro would definitely bring.
I agree absolutely with everything you said. I think the role on the bench just suits him more. I think splitting his minutes, like so much of last season and so much of what he's had to deal with is being alongside Mobley and Jarrett Allen and kind of being forced to be like, all right, well, you're the third best shooter on the floor, so we need you to stand in the corner. And that's difficult even for good shooters. I know J.R. Smith and Iman Shumpert have talked about during the LeBron days, like it's really hard to play defense and run up and down the court for 10 minutes without touching the ball. And then all of a sudden it's like, boom, you're open, take a three now. Like that's difficult for anybody, let alone someone who like Okoro was never a shooter coming out of college. This was always his biggest flaw, and it's something he's worked relentlessly at to improve. But with the improvements he has made, it would still be a huge leap to go from where he is now to being like a legit off ball, can move through screens and knock down 3-pointers. Like that's a huge leap to make, and I don't think it's fair to expect that from him. And as you said, I think it's really more about just improving his handle and playing to his strengths, doing what he already is capable of doing at a really high level. And I think he's able to do that in the second unit where they're playing with more spacing around him because he's not next to Mobley and Allen. And the Cavs in general just have more spacing now. They're playing at a faster pace, where in that first game, I mean, I think he had 19 points on 8 shots or something like that. And at least 3 or 4 of them were in transition because he's a really fast and like freakish athlete who's great at finishing at the rim. And when you kind of let him out of the box and let him run in transition, that's when you see these like really efficient scoring games from him. And in that game, he hit a pull-up 3 above the break. And when's the last time he did that? He doesn't do it very often. And even in this game, he took a 3. I don't know if he got the rebound or what it was, but he was bringing the ball up in transition, walked right into a 3 above the break. He missed, but I was like, I don't think I've ever seen Okoro take an above the break 3 early in the shot clock off the dribble. So just the confidence has seemed off the charts for me, and I'm really happy to see him in this new role.
Yeah, it was almost like he wanted to respond to the 3-pointer the Magic made right before. I think it was like Jet Howard or something. And he's like, all right, bet. Brings the ball up the court. Doesn't even wait for the other 4 players to get there. He's like, it's just going to be me,
I've never seen him act like that.
That was wild, to say the least. 1, it wasn't a corner 3, which are like his favorite spots. And then 2, it was in transition. I know the argument against Okoro's game in the first one was a lot of the points were helped by transition play, which is something he's like always excelled at. But you also just can't look, when you look at Okoro's growth between what we saw at the end of last season and this season, is just the level of movement in this offense and seeing how it opens things up for him to even just become that connective tissue type player. If he can even have a semblance of that in this offense, regardless of who he's on the floor with, that's a huge plus that makes him so much more valuable offensively. Because I think the lazy argument against Okoro and like people who watch playoff games is like, all he does is sit in the corner, and that's why he's been yanked every time. But that's by scheme, not by choice for Okoro. I bet if you asked Okoro how he would want his game to be built around, it's exactly the situation he's in right now. He's not going to be your lead dog, and it doesn't mean he's a failure of a player. I think he's truly going to thrive in this situation, and as long as he is also paired with like a Karis LeVert, a Darius, or a Donovan, one of the 3 at the same time, I think that's when he's really going to unlock a lot of things this year. So I'm pretty excited. I know as the president of the fan club, you are also very thrilled.
Of course. I think one of the other big takeaways is like, even if Okoro maybe isn't like moving off ball at a crazy rate right now, I think just the fact that he is setting up above the break so often, like, and he's being able to catch an attack because, as we've said, there's so much extra spacing out there that when he gets the ball, he's able to actually get downhill. And it's a lot easier to drive to the basket when you're on the elbow rather than standing in the corner and you only really have one way to drive. Like, so we've seen him get downhill a little more. We've seen him show more confidence in his handle. And I've always said, I think he's a good playmaker. I've always said, I think he has good vision. I think it's just it's a combination of being limited by being in the corner, and also just his handle was never quite there. So it's like he wanted to do things that he just couldn't quite do yet. And if he's able to put that together, like, I know it's become a meme at this point, but he's only 22 years old. There were 4 players in the first round of the draft this year who are older than him. And so it's like, we kind of view Okoro as if he's a bust, which I mean, I don't, but I know some people do. And it's just crazy to say that about a guy who has gradually improved at his biggest weakness. His strengths on defense are he's a damn good perimeter defender. He's good at finishing in the paint. He's flashed a little bit of playmaking, and he's gradually improved as a shooter. So I'm still all in on the Okoro hype train. I don't think he's ever going to be an all-star, but I would bet all my money on him being a very productive role player, whether it's in Cleveland or somewhere else in the future. I think Okoro is going to be a good NBA player, and I don't think that's a hot take anymore, but maybe it is.
Maybe to Jackson.
Yeah. Good thing Jackson's not here. Otherwise, we might have to pull back some of the propaganda, but we've been freed tonight. Much like Isaac Okoro, we've been freed to say whatever we want here. So moving along, probably the most anticipated player for the Cavs this preseason, Emoni Bates. First game, electric, came right in, instant offense, has left everyone with no doubt that he can flat out shoot the ball. I mean, if he catches it, doesn't matter where he's standing, doesn't matter where the defense is. First off, he's going to shoot it because his confidence is just endless. He has no fear of the moment, of any shot. He's never seen a shot that he doesn't like. So I do like that about him. It's a potential flaw, and I think we saw some of that through stretches of this game where he kind of took some difficult shots and they weren't dropping right away, and the Cavs kind of fell behind. Well, they were already behind, but they fell farther behind. And then all of a sudden, he catches fire again, and you're like, wow, we're right back in this. We're down by 3, and then we'll just ignore what happened at the end of the game. But
nothing happened.
Nothing happened. It just
Valley Sports cut out.
Yeah, well, that's not too much of a surprise for Valley, but bringing this back to Emoni Bates, what have you seen from him in these 2 games?
I feel like I saw exactly what I would expect to see from Emoni Bates. I can come out and say that I have not been like as high on Bates as everyone else, in the sense that I don't think he's going to play meaningful minutes for the Cavs this season. And that isn't an indictment on the player. It's more, if you just visibly look at him, you can see that there is a roadmap of development that needs to take place for him to become a player you want suiting up for your team every day. Defensively, my questions all still remain. I don't think I mean, you can speak if you feel otherwise, but I didn't see anything defensively that really, like, I see the effort is there, which is good, because if he was turned off defensively and was just going unconscious from shooting everywhere, I'm pretty sure JB would yank his ass like immediately.
He wouldn't have lasted very long.
But he's trying. It's no slight to him that his body is so slight. I mean, the dude's ankles look like toothpicks. Every time I look at him, I'm like, all it takes is one knee-to-knee contact, and I would fear that dude would tear some ligament that we would never hear from again. But defensively, it's just he needs to build more muscle or just become sturdier. I think that is an obvious issue that he can improve on. Offensively, I knew he was I didn't expect him to be this aggressive with his unconscious shooting, because all summer league, I think of the first game immediately, like, where I'm like, dude, this is a game where the other 4 players you're playing with probably want to beat you up the minute we go back into the locker room. Like, you're not hitting anything. You're hitting the backboard more times.
Shoot.
Yeah, it's in the DNA. You can't do anything about it. And I think I'm glad the shot making, when he shoots, I don't feel nervous. It's not going in more times than not. He usually shoots when there are open looks. It gets dangerous and dicey, I think, when he makes more than 2 shots out of his first 3, because you're like, oh shit, all right, we're locked in.
Emoni Bates night.
It's Emoni Bates time. He's like, hand out the bobbleheads. It was an unofficial promo night. And he just goes nuclear. I was honestly shocked. There was a sequence where he got the ball kicked out to him. He was wide open, kicks it to Dean Wade, no second thought. And I was like, wow, that alone is growth. And then Dean Wade missed.
That was big. But that was a big sign of growth, though, in all seriousness.
And then it was also mired, though, by a stretch of 3 shots that were hideous and a layup attempt. I immediately was
got blocked on, I think, right?
Yep. He
Yeah.
had no sense to shoot that. The guy was literally draped over him, and he just throws up this half-ass layup that just gets sent to the other second row. I'm pretty sure Jackson got it from the from the booth. Overall, though, I think Bates, my opinion of him hasn't changed. I think he has potential to be a quality player for this team moving forward. I still don't think it's this season. I am much more on the Craig Porter Jr. getting converted bandwagon if I had to pick one of the three. So it's going to be really interesting for this team. I feel like one of the three by the end is going to be converted.
Like, Emoni Bates is a fascinating player, and those G League games are going to be must watch just for the fact that, as we've said a couple times, that dude just shoots, and he can shoot. Like, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I view him as a shot maker, not a shot creator, because I don't think he creates that much space off the dribble, but it just doesn't matter. He can just shoot over anyone. As long as that shot gets in the air and doesn't get blocked, there's a chance it goes in. Now, we're going to see nights like tonight, or even just stretches like tonight, where the shot's not dropping and he keeps pressing, trying to find his rhythm. And that's just part of being a young player. That's part of being a volume shooter in general, regardless of who you are. But I do think Emoni, on both ends of the floor, looks like a 19-year-old. Like, he looks like an unpolished second-round draft pick who has this big upside that it shows itself at various points. He clearly has the talent to be an NBA caliber shooter. It's just, again, the same questions of, can he fit a role within an offense? What does this look like when he's around Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland or any of the actual rotational players? I'd be really interested to see that if he gets any opportunity. He's just unpolished. He has a lot of raw upside, a lot of raw potential, but there's still some work to do. And it's difficult for any 19-year-old to play consistent minutes on a team that is hoping to be a top 3 team in the conference. Like, it doesn't matter if you're a lottery pick. If you're 19 years old, it's really rare to play big minutes on a team that has goals that are this big. So I've been pleased by what we've seen from Emoni. I think he has shown everything that you need to see from him at this point in Summer League and in the 2 games in preseason. I think he has shown growth, and he has proven that he can shoot at an NBA level. There's just a lot of other questions that need to be answered when it comes to Emoni.
Yeah, I feel like the interesting thing with Bates is that if this was last year's team, I think the roadmap for him getting minutes is as clear as day, because a willing shooter that can convert more times than not with good looks is something that team desperately needed. I think it's a weird case of being drafted to the team at the weird time where they addressed the exact thing that your biggest strength is, which is A, shot attempting, and B, shot making. So I would be curious to know what the roadmap to him getting minutes would really look like. I feel like it'd have to be some injuries to some of the acquisitions we just made with volume shooting, because it would feel a little redundant to have him on certain sets if he's going to roll with some of the bench guys who were strictly brought in for perimeter help. And I don't think Bates' shot I feel like when I think of Bates' shot making, it truly is perimeter based. I don't feel like I feel confident in mid range. I don't really think he has the body to handle contact near the glass. So it has to be open looks from the 3. Because like you said, he's not really one to have like a move to get himself open. It feels like he has to have it pretty much open runway and just catch and shoot.
If you get him in a position where he's just spotting up, catch and shoot, I have no doubt that he could shoot 45% from the 3-point line. Like, he's just that good. But in terms of like actually trying to create something off ball, either for himself or playmaking, that's where the concerns come from. And the other area that he needs to grow is moving off ball. Like, we've criticized other Cavs players for just spotting up and waiting for the ball. And that's just something that, again, he's only 19 years old. It's something that he has to learn. And that's why I think the G League will be the best place for him to learn, depending on which kind of developmental path they go for, because there is a world where they just kind of let him fire away and do his thing in the G League. But then there's also maybe they really try to hammer home, like, hey, this is how you navigate around screens. Here's how to shoot in motion, because that's a completely different skill set than spotting up and shooting off the dribble. Doing something like what Max Strus does, coming off a screen, turning and firing, that's a very different skill that we haven't really seen from Emoni. And I think that's what the Cavs need the most. But to tie this all back together, at the end of the day, having someone like Emoni at the back of your rotation or just on the fringe of your roster, I think that's a win for the Cavs, because there is the potential there. It could pay off. And he has clearly taken the opportunity seriously, and he's putting everything into it.
Yeah, I think the Cavs have done. I think an underrated talent of this Cavs brass is really pinpointing late to undrafted players. You usually just target that niche skill, and they can just develop around it. And we have seen very many cases recently with them thriving. And I think Bates is probably going to fall into that success as well. I don't want to make it seem like I'm super anti-Bates. I just am against the idea of Bates playing meaningful minutes this season. And it's, like I said, not an indictment on him. It's more the team he's in. It would take insane developments that are almost unfathomable from what you're looking at in the first 2 preseason games to what you want him to be playing consistent minutes. Like there's people out there saying, I want him to be the starting 3 for the Cavs. And I just, it boils, it grinds my gears
a little bit.
It's like I'll be as excited as you are when he succeeds. It's just we need to like take a breather and realize there's a huge gap between an NBA player and where Emoni Bates is right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm in that same boat. I've been super encouraged by the process so far, but it's still a process, still a long journey. Any of those criticisms doesn't mean that I'm not rooting for him. And really, I don't even like to say criticisms. I'm just pointing out the weaknesses that I'm sure he already knows he has to work on. And I think he has been working on them because we've seen gradual growth just from where he started game 1 of the Summer League to where he is now. So I'm rooting for Emoni, rooting for all the G League guys, honestly. I think it's going to be a fun year for them. I think the Cavs, just top to bottom, have so much talent on the roster that one way or another, trying to fit them all into the puzzle this year is going to be really fun.
Yeah, I think it is a real testament to the team that I feel like through 2 games, the only thing you could say you feel like you miss about this team is that just Jarrett Allen not being there defensively kind of shakes up a lot. And I don't think they still are looking for some way to, I mean, Damian Jones, like you said, has played decently well. I think Mobley has played all right as well. Isaiah, not Evan. Evan's been great. But Isaiah has been okay. I think that's kind of the question mark I'm still leaving with through 2 preseason games is I don't think I have a clear favorite as to who that's going to be.
Tristan Thompson played big minutes tonight, which I know he's got to be hurting. It's been a few years since he played big minutes like that, but he was out there, he was running, took a lot of contact tonight. So just a fun year setting up for the Cavs. I'm really interested to see what will happen when Jarrett Allen's back in the lineup. We'll figure out an update for that, but I think that's going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and go Cavs.
I agree. Go Sam Merrill.